On April 4, 1841, William Henry Harrison died about 1 month after becoming president. The date is precise. The consequence was not. How could the presidency continue when its holder was suddenly gone? That question sits inside a larger record. Attempts have thus been made on the lives of 1 of every 5 American presidents. The sentence does not establish what happened in any individual case. It does show that danger to the office was documented as a recurring concern. Harrison died on April 4, 1841, about 1 month after becoming president. A later constitutional rule states what follows when a president dies in office. That left a question with practical force. When a president dies, does the vice president take over the office or merely its duties? The answer would determine whether the government faced a vacancy, a temporary substitute, or a new president. The record of presidential deaths therefore begins with a short interval and an unresolved transfer. Harrison's death provides the opening question. Later evidence, including the rapid fate of Czolgosz after his capture, belongs to a different case and a different consequence. To understand what this record can establish, the next step is to examine who recorded it and under what circumstances. The record now has a second layer, and it comes from a different presidency. Leon Czolgosz was captured immediately, then swiftly tried, convicted, and condemned to death. The record states that Czolgosz was captured immediately, then swiftly tried, convicted, and condemned to death. It supports the claim that Czolgosz was captured immediately and that his trial, conviction, and condemnation followed swiftly. The wording compresses several stages into one line: capture, trial, conviction, and condemnation. It shows what happened to the accused after capture. The same record places that case beside a broader statement. Attempts have thus been made on the lives of 1 of every 5 American presidents. That comparison widens the subject, but it does not erase the difference between an attempt and a death in office. One describes danger directed at presidents. The other describes the consequence when a president actually dies. For Harrison, the relevant verified fact is that he died on April 4, 1841, about 1 month after becoming president. The Czolgosz passage records a captured, accused man who was swiftly tried, convicted, and condemned to death. The record can show that attempts on presidential lives were being counted and that Czolgosz was captured, tried, convicted, and condemned to death. This is where the unresolved question moves forward. Harrison's death exposed uncertainty at the top of the government. Czolgosz's rapid prosecution shows certainty after capture. The contrast is not a contradiction. It reveals 2 separate points in the chain. What happens when the office loses its holder, and what happens when the person blamed for an attack is placed under state control? The constitutional mechanism for the first problem would come later in the evidence. Section 1 of the 25th Amendment states that the vice president becomes president if the president is removed from office, dies, or resigns. That sentence gives a clear answer to the question Harrison left behind, but it belongs to a later constitutional framework. For now, the record only allows you to separate the pieces. Harrison died about 1 month after becoming president. Presidential lives have been threatened often enough for the record to state that attempts had reached 1 in 5. In the Czolgosz case, the record states that he was captured immediately, then swiftly tried, convicted, and condemned to death. Together, those facts establish pressure, response, and limitation. They do not yet explain the mechanism that connects a president's death to the transfer of power. That mechanism is the next part of the story. Section 1 of the 25th Amendment gives the missing action a direct form. Section 1 of the 25th Amendment states that the vice president becomes president if the president is removed from office, dies, or resigns. The office does not remain occupied by a dead man. The constitutional rule moves the presidency to another person. That matters because Harrison's death was not only a personal loss or a date in a record. He died on April 4, 1841, about 1 month after becoming president. His death created the precise condition the later amendment names. A president had died while in office. The question was no longer whether the presidency had a holder, it was who would hold it next. The amendment's wording is blunt. It does not say the vice president merely performs presidential duties. It says the vice president becomes president. Death produces a transfer. Removal produces the same transfer. Resignation does too. 3 different events lead to one constitutional result. This is the mechanism behind the larger chain. A president can be threatened. A president can die in office. An accused attacker can be captured and swiftly judged. Those are separate facts with separate legal and political consequences. The fate of the accused belongs to the criminal process. The fate of the presidency belongs to succession. You can see why the 2 processes must remain separate. Czolgosz was captured immediately, then swiftly tried, convicted, and condemned to death. That sequence describes what happened after a person was placed under state control. It does not decide who holds presidential power. A criminal judgment may follow an attack, but it cannot fill an empty presidency. The succession rule answers a different emergency. It does not depend on a trial reaching its end. It does not depend on proving why a president died. It does not depend on whether anyone attacked the president at all. The stated condition is simpler. If the president dies, the vice president becomes president. That distinction narrows the explanation. Harrison's death and the Czolgosz case are separate records with separate consequences. They show 2 branches that can emerge around presidential peril. One branch concerns responsibility for an alleged act. The other concerns continuity when the presidency loses its holder. Section 1 also places death beside removal and resignation. The amendment treats them as different paths into the same vacancy problem. A president may leave office through death. A president may be removed. A president may resign. In each stated case, the vice president becomes president. The rule therefore turns a fragile moment into a defined sequence. First, the president is no longer in office through one of those stated conditions. Then the vice president becomes president. The transfer is not presented as a choice to be negotiated after the fact. The amendment states the outcome. For Harrison, the date remains the starting pressure, April 4th, 1841, about 1 month after he became president. The later amendment supplies language for the result of a president's death in office. It explains what happens to the office when death occurs. That limit matters. A constitutional sentence can settle succession without settling medicine, motive, responsibility, or public reaction. It can explain the transfer of power without explaining every death that triggers it. The mechanism is narrow by design, and its narrowness is what makes the chain clear. The record about attempts on presidential lives adds another pressure point. It says attempts have been made on the lives of 1 of every 5 American presidents. That statement shows that danger to presidents was not confined to a single event, yet it still does not tell you the outcome of every attempt. So the evidence has to be read in order. First comes the danger or the death. In Harrison's case, the verified fact is that he died on April 4th, 1841, about 1 month after becoming president. Then comes the question of who holds power. Section 1 provides the stated answer. The vice president becomes president. Separately, where an accused attacker is captured, the legal process can proceed against that person. The consequence is concrete. A president's death can end one individual's tenure without ending the presidency itself. The office continues through succession. The death record and the constitutional language therefore address different questions. One records a death, while the other states what follows for the office. Still, a rule written later can make the earlier story look cleaner than the evidence allows. It tells you the formal answer now. It does not erase uncertainty in individual cases, and it does not turn every reported attempt into the same kind of event. The next question is how far the surviving record can really carry that conclusion. Section 1 of the 25th Amendment gives you the formal mechanism in one sentence. The vice president shall become president if the president is removed from office, dies, or resigns. The wording matters because it describes a change in office, not merely a temporary caretaker arrangement. When a president dies, the constitutional consequence is succession. That rule addresses succession. William Henry Harrison died on April 4th, 1841, about 1 month after becoming president. The amendment states the rule that governs its own period. It can only state the rule that governs the same constitutional problem in the period when the amendment applies. You therefore have to keep two questions separate. The first is historical. What happened to the president? The second is constitutional. What happens to the presidency after the office holder dies? The first question depends on the record of the death. The second depends on the succession rule. Connecting them traces the constitutional consequence of death. It means tracing the consequence that follows from it. The same discipline applies when the record turns to presidential attacks. Attempts have thus been made on the lives of one of every 5 American presidents. That sentence establishes a reported pattern of danger. It does not establish that every attempt had the same outcome. Some may have ended without a presidential death. The statement alone cannot identify each event, its circumstances, or its legal result. Czolgosz provides a separate example of what follows when an attacker is captured. The record says that Czolgosz, who had been captured immediately, was swiftly tried, convicted, and condemned to death. That sequence describes a prosecution. It does not prove that the legal response was identical in every other case, and it does not turn an attempted attack into a completed presidential death. The causal chain is therefore narrower than the subject first suggests. A president dies, the office remains. A constitutional rule identifies the successor. In a separate track, an accused attacker may enter the legal system if captured. Each record answers a different question, and the explanation becomes stronger when you refuse to merge them. That distinction also limits what you can infer from the numbers. A claim about attempts measures exposure to danger, while a claim about presidents who died in office measures a final outcome. Those are related records, but they are not interchangeable. The first cannot automatically produce the second. By the time you reach the succession rule, the apparent mystery has shifted. The issue is no longer whether a presidential death leaves a constitutional vacancy. Section 1 supplies the formal answer for its own governing period. The vice president becomes president when the president dies. The unresolved question is how much confidence the surviving records deserve when they describe the danger itself, especially across different cases and different kinds of evidence. The phrase is striking, but it also demands restraint. Attempts have thus been made on the lives of one of every 5 American presidents. That sentence establishes a pattern of danger. It does not identify every attempt, explain every circumstance, or show which events ended in death. The wording matters because it measures threats, not outcomes. An attempt can fail. A president can survive. A president can die without the record establishing an attempted attack. Treating those results as one category would make the record appear more complete than it is. The same boundary applies to the legal example already in view. The record says, Czolgosz, who had been captured immediately, was swiftly tried, convicted, and condemned to death. That tells you what happened in that case after capture. It does not establish that every attacker was captured immediately or that every prosecution followed the same course. So the evidence supports a narrower conclusion. Presidential danger was not limited to a single incident, yet the available statement does not provide a full list or a uniform explanation. It gives a proportion without supplying all the underlying cases. You can recognize the scale of the claim while leaving its missing details visible. That uncertainty also protects the succession argument from being stretched too far. The constitutional rule explains what happens to the office after death. The attempt statistic describes exposure before that outcome. One concerns institutional continuity, the other concerns threats against individual presidents. They connect in sequence, but neither replaces the other. William Henry Harrison's brief presidency must remain separate from the record of attempted attacks. The record establishes that he died on April 4, 1841, about 1 month after becoming president. The record establishes the date and the short interval. It does not, in the evidence available here, establish that his death belonged to the category of attempted attacks. The evidentiary boundary is therefore clear. The record states that attempts have been made on the lives of one of every 5 American presidents. You can say that Czolgosz was captured immediately and then swiftly tried, convicted, and condemned to death. You can say that a presidential death triggers succession under the stated constitutional rule. You cannot use those facts to reconstruct every threat, every motive, or every death without additional records. That leaves the original pressure in place, but in a sharper form. Harrison's death shows how quickly the presidency could change hands. The attempt statistic shows that danger reached beyond one case. The legal record shows one documented response after an attacker was caught. Together, they narrow the question for the final step. When the record returns to Czolgosz, what does it actually prove about the consequence of a presidential attack? The answer is narrow, but it is firm. The record does not prove every attack, every motive, or every presidential death through one story. It proves one documented consequence after Czolgosz was captured immediately. He was swiftly tried, he was convicted, he was condemned to death. Those are the facts the record gives you. They show that an attack on a president could lead to an immediate capture and a rapid legal response. They do not, by themselves, establish every detail before the capture or every result beyond the sentence. That distinction keeps the evidence about Harrison's death separate. The record states that Harrison died on April 4, 1841, about 1 month after becoming president. His short time in office shows how suddenly a presidency could end. It does not turn his death into evidence of an attempted attack. The record keeps those categories separate. The broader danger still remains visible. Attempts have been made on the lives of one of every 5 American presidents. That statement describes the reach of the threat. Czolgosz's case supplies a documented consequence when an attacker was caught: capture, trial, conviction, and condemnation to death. A president's death changes the office. Under the stated constitutional rule, the vice president becomes president when the president dies. Czolgosz's recorded case shows a separate consequence for the attacker, while Harrison's death shows the presidency could pass to another person with startling speed.